let's talk about where are we now and where are we going. What's the trends? So before I start with that, I'm going to talk a bit about me. I work with APIs. I blog about them on mashup.se. I consult in my own company called Dopter. We're two people working full-time with APIs, consulting, Sveriges Radiotrafikverket, SL, working with Trafiklab, working with some gaming companies and so forth, working with strategies and the technology around APIs. So that's what I do. I can't keep my fingers off the code. I have to do something. So I also develop products for API owners that want to market their API at apihq.com. And of course, I'm one of the co-organizers here together with Tubo. And it's very, very nice to see you all here. Let's jump into where are we. I was going to start with talking about the past, but that got to be many slides, and who cares? The wheel's invented, HTTP is invented. Let's look at where we are right now, and more importantly, where are we going to be tomorrow? If we look at where we are right now, APIs are everywhere. That's kind of the summary of what Travis was saying before. APIs are everywhere. It is the way to integrate systems today. It's not very common that you have to be a gigantomongous XML file to a specific server and somebody else logs into that FTP account and picks it up. It has been common in the past, thank God not anymore. APIs is the way you do system integration today. It's also the way to expose data. If you want to expose data to somebody else to use, you use an API. It could be somebody internally in your company, it could be a partner you have a contract with, or it could be everyone. This is the way you do it, via an API. And it's going beyond internet startups. There's, of course, Twitter and Facebook and all other kinds of sexy internet startups that have either no users or 1 billion users. They have APIs. But when somebody like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Nike, Coca-Cola, Ford, you name it, all the big companies starting to have APIs, this is something more than a toy. This is a vital part of their business. This is what they need to move forward and to not be overrun by startups that's using this new technology. So this is something that's here to stay. And this is all hinting to infrastructure. There's a lot of talk today about the cloud. Everything has to be in the cloud. The cloud is great, but the important glue in the cloud is an API. If you're going to have your servers in the cloud, you're going to use Amazon's API or something like that. The cloud is built on APIs, or at least held together by APIs. And on the cloud, there's a lot of mobile solutions built, and there's also mobile solutions built outside the cloud, of course. And this is the way that APIs enter a lot of companies. They start with an iPhone app, but to get any data into that app that's anything interesting, they have to have an API to access data on their servers. And then you have an API that somebody can just hook up Charles Proxy or something to and listen to and document, even if they don't want to, which has happened to every big bank in this country, and to SE and to several others. So be aware, if you have an iPhone app, you have an API that you might not want public, but it's going to be public sooner or later. Another important part is sync, which is of course also a cloud service. My guess is that everybody in here is using Dropbox. If you're not, you're using some other sync service to sync files between computers or systems. This is all API driven. And it's quite easy for you to use these services in your own applications if you want to. So API is a vital part of the infrastructure on the web today. Another big thing in the present is OpenGov. There's a European PSI directive, which a bit simplified states that government data should be open and freely accessible. And this has a big impact in Sweden, Denmark, Norway. There's a big open data movement, which is great. We paid for it, let us have the data. I want to have access to weather data. I want to have access to unemployment data, whatever it is. I paid for it somehow, give me access to it for free. And this open data movement is really impacting also the business of APIs. Because the more data there is, the more developers will start using these APIs and this data and realize the power of them and demand them from private companies. So this is a big driver in the Nordics especially. And outside the Nordics, the UK has come quite far. There's quite a lot happening in the US. So this is a big thing globally. Another thing in the present, API events. Well, you're at one right now. And part of all these API events, of course, hackathons. There's a hackathon every day. You can't walk down the street without accidentally bumping into a hackathon. I was at one this weekend, a travel hack, which was about public transport data. Really good one, actually. But there's a lot of these things out there. I think it's going to be a bit of an overdose, and there's not going to be that many next year. But this is a big thing right now. If you want to market your API, just throwing up a hackathon is probably not the way to do it. You should, at the very least, have a hackathon that has a focus where your API might be one of several. So in Travel Hack, it was public transport that was the focus, but there was APIs from Spotify, from Microsoft, from Manito, and so forth, invited as well, because you want to use the public transport data to do something. You don't just want to have another travel planner. You want to have a travel planner to go to a museum, or you want to listen to music while you go in the subway, or whatever it might be. And of course, API events like this. Nordic APIs here in the Nordics, and we want to be a serious event, as Travis said. There's API Summit, there's API Strategy in Practice that was in New York in February. There are several others going on. And this is a sign that this industry is growing up. We're not just talking on Twitter anymore and doing blogging. We're actually meeting and talking about it physically, which is kind of a change for me at least. Several of you I know through Twitter only, so it's nice to meet you here today. Another big thing today is de facto standards. We can talk about W3C specifications. We can talk about this and that specification being ratified and officially recognized. Who cares? We're building APIs for somebody to use. And if we're building public APIs, open APIs, the developers that will use them, they have already used APIs from Twitter and from Facebook. These are the companies that are setting the de facto standards today. Like it or not, this is the way it is. So if you're building an API, you should really look at these companies, what they're doing, and kind of adapt to that, because that's what people are used to. And that means something kind of REST-ish. It means JSON, and it means something inspired by one version or another of OAuth 2. And we're going to hear more about OAuth 2 later today, so much more detail on that. So this is today. Let's look at what happens tomorrow. And of course, there's not like a line in the sand that everything I talk about now will happen soon. The trends have kind of started, and I kind of tie into what's going on right now. Well, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about the obvious thing. There's going to be more. More of everything. There's going to be more APIs in more industries. There's going to be more industries that's disrupted by APIs and by startups releasing data that's previously haven't been released. There's energy data being released in Sweden. There's financial data being released. There's travel data being released. Expedia is today turning over $1 billion through their API, doing hotel recommendations and booking rental cars and stuff like that. This is big business, and it's going to happen in any industry. More REST and JSON. If you like it or not, it's going to be more of that. And there's going to be more open data. This is kind of the obvious stuff. So let's go on to the less obvious stuff. API management. Every time you build an API and you're going to release it, you need to have more than just a technical solution in that package. As a developer, I'm not interested in your API if it's just a technical solution. I want documentation. I probably want to be able to get the API key or whatever you have easy and quickly. I want to be able to get code up and running as quickly as possible. I want to have some kind of interactive documentation. You want statistics of how I use it. There's a lot of those things part of the package that you don't need to write yourself, even if it could be kind of fun. So don't reinvent the wheel unless you can patent it in the US, because then you can make a killing. And this is quite important. You're after the whole package. You want to offer the whole package to the developers, because those are your customers. So ask them what they want and develop the whole thing, or deliver the whole thing, but don't develop. You can buy these things. For example, from Layer 7, one of the sponsors, there's Apogee, Mashery, 3Scale. I can go on for a long time. There's lots of companies doing this, and there are going to be more. All the big players in the IT industry are looking at this. Internet of Things, which basically mean internet enabling everything. And I mean everything. I mean your car, I mean your house, I mean your shoes, I mean your glasses, everything. This is happening, and it's happening quite quickly. Tesla, that does cars, they have an unofficial API because somebody hacked it and documented it on GitHub. Thank you. Ford has actually an official API. You can write apps that run on Ford cars. Philips, about a week ago, released an API to their U lamp series. So you have a REST API where you can change the color of the lamp through the spectrum. You can switch it on and off. And you only have to pay 500 crowns per lamp. So it's going to be a real killer. But it's a cool trend. Internet enable everything. With Ninja blocks, you can internet enable your house with sensors and have a REST API to movement detectors and humidity detectors and so forth. And there's many, many more of these. Just the other day, I read about yoga clothes that tell you how good you are at yoga. Why not? And all of these, all of these will be available through APIs. APIs is the glue to keep all this stuff together. API for muggles, and by that I mean non-coders. APIs are great. If you don't speak fluent curl, if you can't read JSON, APIs could be hard to use. But it's coming more and more solutions where anybody can use APIs. Maybe they don't have to write code, but they can configure APIs somehow and use them without writing any code, which is fantastic. Basically automating stuff. And I'm thinking about primarily two services. One is ifttt.com. I have to get the number of T's right there. It's if this, then that. You say, if this happened, do that. If I save a file on Evernote, update my Facebook status. If somebody moves in this room, then send me an SMS. If the sun goes up, then do this. There's so many things you can hook together on ifttt, and all you do is configure a service. But in the background, there's APIs. And if you need to explain APIs to somebody that's never used them, this is a great way to go, because they can see really the different actions you can hook together. If you want something more business-like, Zapier.com does a similar thing, but for business services. So this is more hooking up CRM systems and Basecamp and stuff like that, and kind of automating a workflow there. Again, built on APIs, but presented in such a way that you don't need to write any code, which is the way to go. Next trend I want to mention is aggregation. There are a lot of APIs out there. Programmable web lists over 8,000. In my meager API directory for Sweden, I list about 200, most of them not in programmable web. And it's a lot of work to use all of these as a developer. Even if you want to use an API to log into services, you have Twitter, you have Facebook, you have LinkedIn, you have Google, you have lots of them, right? It's a lot of work to go through all these services and make it work and maintain that code. But what you want is one API to rule them all. You want to have one API that hides all this complexity as much as possible to make your life as a developer easier. There's not one API to rule them all, but there's a few APIs to rule a few of them. Janrain and Singly are a couple of examples of services that takes, in this case, the login functionality of different services and wraps them so it's easy for a developer to use them. And if Facebook changes some detail in their login process, you don't need to care. That's Janrain's or Singly's problem to fix, because you're interfacing with them. There's some similar solutions aimed at developers too, which are a bit more scripting. For example, WebShell, where you can easily mash up different APIs using their services without you having to write too much code. It's a bit simplifying your coding. So the complexity with all these APIs out there, somebody's working on it and making your life easier, which is very nice. Real time. With APIs, you get some data when you ask for it. That's a bit boring. Of course, you want to have all data all of the time, right? And this is real time. With streaming, you get an open connection and somebody sends you all the data you want. The most obvious example is Twitter's Firehose, where they charge a lot of money, but in return you get all their data as soon as they have it. You need a lot of servers to handle it and to make any use of it, but if you have a lot of servers and a lot of interest in data, this is gold. Twitter also have streaming APIs for fewer amount of users than all, so if you're interested just in 100 or 10 or whatever it might be, there's streaming APIs for that too. And this is coming quite rapidly, because an API represents a very limited worldview somebody else has structured. And you might not be interested in that data, and you might not be interested in asking for it all the time. You want it sent to you as soon as possible. Another, which is kind of semi-real-time, is push, where you subscribe to changes and they're pushed to you as they happened. There are many services around this that have APIs themselves, so if you want to integrate the push solution into your iPhone app or web service, whatever it is, there's plenty of services out there that does this efficiently and quite cheaply. And this is coming to basically all APIs down the line. Any API that has a had a lot of data flowing through it needs this kind of solution. I worked on the Nobel Prize API, and they don't need a streaming data because the number of Nobel Prize winners don't update daily. But Facebook, for example, absolutely needs a streaming API because people write way too much information in the newsfeed all the time. So it's kind of depending on what kind of data model we're talking about, but it's coming, and it's coming quick. API design. More about this later today, especially more about hypermedia APIs. You're soon going to hear a great presentation about that. It's a lot of discussion right now in the API world if you should use hypermedia or not. Exactly what that is, I'm going to actually let the next guy talk about. But the discussion is going to continue. It's going to be a lot of discussion on how do you design a good API. And it's going to go more from just REST answer to everything till we need different answers for different problems. You might want to use REST in some cases. You might want to use something completely different in another case. And there's going to be a lot more discussion, and the whole space is kind of going to mature. But the discussion is going to happen. Part of that discussion is descriptors, excuse me, which is describing the API. And in SOAP we have WSDL, which describes what operations you had in your SOAP services. And there's similar solutions for REST. There's WADL, there's JSON docs, IO docs, and I can continue for a while. There's a new one popping up every day, and everybody's kind of competing of being the perfect, ultimate descriptor for a REST service. None have won so far, and I just hope somebody kind of steps ahead of the crowd. I don't really care who, but just as long as we have a way to describe REST APIs, never mind if it's perfect or not, actually. Linked data has, together with semantic web, been a very academic solution for a long time, but it's now growing up, and we're seeing more of it. Facebook have some, and there's a lot in the open data movement to release linked data, so you easily can put different data sets together and create something new, more valuable. And part of all this is documentation. There's already a lot happening in the documentation of APIs. There's Swagger, IODocs, and my own APIHQ.com, and so forth, to create interactive documentation where developers can test an API straight away in a browser without writing any code. And that's all about reducing that time from somebody finding an API to having work in code. And we're going to see lots more work happening there, I hope, because it's kind of stagnant right now. It happened a lot 6 months ago, and not much has happened since. But it's gonna come quickly. This is all great, fantastic. APIs, hallelujah. Well, not really. APIs are great for a lot of things. They are not the solution to all problems, which might not be a perfect thing for me to say since this is how I make my living, but it's true. It's not a silver bullet. There's been lots of technology sold before as silver bullets. There's been SOA and so forth. I can go on a long time. These are not silver bullets. APIs are not a silver bullet. We haven't really found all the best practices around APIs yet. Just look at what Twitter have done with changing their API agreements and rate limits and kind of experimenting with business models and everything. Netflix does no longer have an open API. You can't get any more API keys and use their API. Google Reader is going to shut down, and they're very unofficial, never documented by Google. Their API has kind of become the standard in syncing RSS feeds across devices, and it's shutting down. This is all part of the API space growing up. There's going to be changes, and developers are going to be more aware of what kind of requirements are we putting on APIs, for example, of good license agreements and consistent pricings and so forth. This is part of growing up. There's going to be a backlash, but it's not that bad. Never mind the backlash. Let's just go. We just have to be aware of that people are suddenly going to be very negative, and then API is going to be part of the standard toolkit. That's the way it always goes with these hypes. So I think we have a great future ahead of us. So some creative comments. This is where I got some stuff. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
Will you make it available?
Yes, all the slides you see will be available. And so follow us on Twitter or check out our website. We're going to make it available. Okay, thank you very much for your time.